Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Cepin and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Andy Littleton. I am sitting across from Eric Cepin. We are from Mission Church and the Village, respectively. And today, Eric sent me a very provocatively titled article about role-playing games destroying the world, or something like that. Hurting. And then I brought up Jordan Peterson's message to churches. We talked about vacations somehow mixed into all that, and other things.
Yeah. So if you enjoy just a rambling Andy and Eric conversation, this is it's rambling.
This was probably a very true Faith Over Breakfast. If we were just sitting down at the cafe down the street, Eric goes, "Did you see this? This is the kind of conversation we'd have." So you're invited. That's the point. That's our podcast.
Yeah.
We have our breakfast table conversation. You're invited. There's a chair right next to us. Got a bunch of stuff on it, but we imagine that's you.
Yeah. Or Jesus. One of the two.
One of the two. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. All right, cool. Hey.
So, man, I'm first of all, you're telling me about my life in ways I didn't expect. You know about me. You're tracking me.
Yes,
somehow.
I was tracking you. I heard that your wife came up to see you and she got like a blowout tire before she got into Globe.
Wow.
And,
your source is really inaccurate.
Let's see if I can give everything that I heard.
Yeah.
So there's this blowout and something happens and it's your daughter's in the car with all the dogs. Right?
Okay, there you go. You got that part.
There's no cell service. They have to climb up a hill.
Uh-huh.
It's like breaking up between you and
right.
So you call 911 for a wellness check.
Yeah, that happened.
But then the policeman couldn't take all of you guys, of your wife and kid because of all the dogs and luggage.
Yeah.
But you did figure out where the car was,
uh-huh.
and you guys were able to go down and deal with it.
Yep. The clutch went out.
Oh, that's right. He did say the clutch. I just couldn't remember what it was that went out.
So I was on the pastors group that we're in, had a retreat.
We're in two pastors groups, let's be honest. The broader one.
Well, the local one, the Tucson one. And had a retreat in Greer. So I was at that, wife and daughter coming up to hang out with me a few more days there because that cabin was available the entire week. And clutch goes out in the mountains on the road. I mean, cars just left in the road for a bit until somebody could help push it off. Really not ideal. Definitely had me concerned. They were fine. It's fine.
It is kind of the setting for a really bad movie. You know?
Yeah.
Like it just starts this way. This is how the bad movie starts.
Right. Anyway, they were there about 4 hours, and then so we had to get the car towed back here. Rod had to give us a ride back to Tucson. Then we took my truck and went back, which we doubted whether that was the right call for a minute, but we still got a couple solid days in Greer. And so, the car's getting,
Was this the Volvo?
No, this is our little Pontiac Vibe, little hatchback. Yeah. It was, the bummer is really just when and exactly where. It was bound to happen someday.
Right.
It's a car that's 17 years old, never had a clutch done. It's going to happen. It was, when you have a standard, that happens. But timing was horrendous.
It's better for your clutch to go than to have an automatic and have your transmission go.
Well,
they tend to be more pricey, the transmissions.
So that's what I've always heard, and that's part of the theory. But interestingly, it sort of seems to be bearing out that because standard transmissions are so rare now, that it's. So I'm getting some quotes. They aren't done. I'll probably hear back from the shop today. But parts for them and replacement. There's like one used standard transmission like this in the area. Only one.
Okay, so you
And so
you
the
have a
price
really
of
old
it-
car too.
The price of it is way inflated because it's the only one.
Gotcha.
Whereas I think that, 10 years ago, there were more standards on the road, and prices are just inflated all over the place. So it's not looking
That's good.
as good as I would have hoped.
Well, I know that on my Volvo, I had to rebuild the transmission.
Yeah, rebuilding automatic transmissions is no joke either.
$1,800.
Yeah. Oh, ours is going to be way more than that.
Wow. For the clutch?
That's almost just what it's going to cost for the clutch.
Wow. That's clutch shot.
That's way more than I
$400.
would have expected. Well, they did have to drop the tranny, so that's why the clutch, if they hadn't had to take the transmission out, wouldn't have been as bad, but it still wouldn't have been cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like I said, when
You would think
in my mind
the
throughout my
rule.
life, that's been the rule. Oh, your standard
But
transmission
you're
is going to
learning
be cheaper to
this
fix.
isn't- At that point, maybe you think about buying a different car
Well,
if it's going over 1,800.
yeah, and we are. But then again, what do you do with this one? We've had this one for a long time. We know exactly how it's been maintained. We've done everything else.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally understand. That's why we rebuilt the Volvo's transmission, because it was like, well,
I know.
I've worked on this car for, at that point, 10 years, so there's no point.
Yeah, it's anyway, all these things get thought about.
Car Talk with Eric and Andy.
That's right. So,
Right
click
now,
and clack. What
we're
do we
looking
do?
for your phone call. We'll help answer any car problems you have.
Now, since my assumption, as you know in this podcast, is nobody gives a rip about our personal lives, which you always disagree with. I still don't understand that.
It's just a silly millennial. But we're really speaking to mostly just Gen Xers, right?
Who actually know how their cars operate?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
No, they really care about relationship. They don't care about
is
the
that-
content. They care about you.
Oh, is that Gen X? I've
Yep.
heard about this before. I didn't grow up with, I'm not Gen X. My parents aren't Gen X. Who are these people? They care about relationships.
Well, there's only 20% of us in the
Oh,
U.S., so.
well, thanks for being around, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. You
Good.
being one of the 20%.
I'm one of the 20%.
So
No, I think millennials care about relationship. People care about relationship. Your church is based on relationship. My church is based on relationship. They want to know about you, Andy. They care about your clutch.
they come in clutch when I need them.
Like a wrecking ball? No. I wouldn't.
Well, it's happened before. So anyway. So you sent me an article by Russell Moore about role-playing game. This is not the type I expected from you. But then again, I was like, he finds it provocative.
Well, no.
And Steve Bannon and all that.
So the thing that caught me in the article, so you can get it on CT. Let's just
Christianity Today, for those of you who
let's give people
from
the
Gen X.
actual title of the article. The only reason it caught my eye to read it was its title, which is Fantasy Role Playing is Hurting America, which I have a lot of fantasy role players in my church. I play fantasy role games. My daughter's just entered a competition with her dungeon that she drew. So I'm in this world.
I'm like, get the phone off the...
Yeah. So I wouldn't normally, unless a Christianity Today article...
They clickbaited you successfully.
They did, which is pretty rare, unless it's, they're saying something about something I'm interested in. So anyway, the article only really starts with the premise of back in the 70s, there was a lot of push about how Dungeons and Dragons was dangerous and da-da-da-da. And he's saying, well, this whole fantasy role-playing thing is what they thought was dangerous is probably not what's dangerous. It's a whole different thing. And then he goes into more about the persona of people living on the internet and playing fantasy role-playing games. When I started reading, I was thinking, actual Dungeons and Dragons, which is a huge thing right now in our culture.
Well, yeah, and I think that the reason it was clickbaity, but that's what you have to do to get people to read articles
like
now.
Me. Yeah.
But the thing he was really talking about was some quotes from Steve Bannon, where essentially Steve Bannon had recognized you've got these people who, like, was it David in the mailroom he described, who feel like a nobody and they have no purpose in life, and they go online and they become Ajax, the warrior. And then that can reverse back and you can call upon those people to try to be the hero in real life.
Yeah.
Now, the thing with Bannon that seemed to come through in the article was that he didn't care so much about them doing what was good and moral and right. He was just like, we can use that.
Right.
Is sort of the sense I got from it.
Right. And what was, and I could take that or leave it. What I thought was fascinating is, just to go back to the example you gave, was it was Dave in the mailroom who passes away, and maybe a pastor who barely knew him and a few people go to his memorial service.
Uh-huh.
Dave in the mailroom, who is Ajax in the fantasy world, has 1,000 people show up at his funeral when Ajax dies, and there's a funeral pyre, and so in this fantasy world he is somebody and has impact. In his real life he's in this sort of mundane, day after day, not a lot of connections, loner, not engaged. This is kind of there's a large group of people like this.
Oh, for sure. And I think what Russell Moore was saying in the article, when he got around to it, hardly had anything to do with role-playing games.
No.
It really was that the Christian faith is calling people to something deeply significant.
Yes.
And that we should lean into that versus, if you don't, you might be susceptible, maybe, is what he was saying, to being caught up in other stories, which is a valid thing to do. I actually texted you back about the Jordan Peterson message to churches, which we were talking about doing on here at some point. But I actually saw in Russell Moore's article, and I'm guessing here, I might be wrong. I think Russell Moore was vaguely alluding to the Peterson piece, because he spent a lot of time on dragons and fighting your dragons, which isn't really a Steve Bannon thing. And have you watched that Peterson video?
I have. I've watched a few of his other ones, because he gives messages to other groups of people.
So his whole theme...
Yeah, let's outline that real fast.
So Peterson's got some stuff coming out on Ben Shapiro's The Daily Wire. Like, they seem to have teamed up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the theme of it is something about fighting your dragons. And so he's got these... And that's the theme. And I just saw that theme running through Russell Moore's article a lot. And so he's calling young men especially to kind of, as Jordan Peterson does, get off the couch, put your pants on, and fight your dragons, do something that matters.
Right.
And he was, in the video to churches, he's telling churches, he's essentially saying, look, when I started talking about the Bible, what was it? 80% of the people who showed up were young men. They're hungry for this. They want meaning. They want something to do. So all you have to do is put a sign out there, give them 3 steps to take, and tell them you need them to do something, and they'll probably show up. Don't worry about how cool or hip your church is. Just give them something substantive to do. And I've seen a little chatter on whether or not that's exactly what he doesn't talk about conversion. He doesn't say a word about make sure they believe the gospel. He just goes, give them something to do. Now, I'm actually not entirely opposed to that. I think there's something to saying give people a meaningful... I would say Jesus called his disciples to follow him before they understood everything that meant. But their transformation was still critical to the process.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought Russell Moore was alluding to that as well.
Right. So we could work... Basically, there are two central theses. Well, one on both of these, which is that people, and they're kind of focusing a little bit more on men.
The whole Dave in the mailroom and everybody Bannon talked about. I mean,
yeah,
it was mostly men.
It's men without purpose.
Men without purpose.
And so, I would argue that it's men and women without purpose, because you see our culture doing this. They just go in different directions. But I see the same kind of, just like what do you call it? Just kind of flailing. That's the word I'm looking for. Flailing around for meaning with women. Like it's there in
well, you
both.
look at January 6th that drew out men and women.
Yeah.
That sort of narrative. Yeah.
And it's just all through, like, all the touch points of our culture are these places where people are flailing for meaning, like the gender touch points, the political, like, touch point, the fact that men, like, well, here, so to go back to Jordan Peterson for just 1 second.
Back to JP.
Like, one of the, Jordan Peterson says, yeah, go, give people something to do, put a sign up. But the real issue is that Jordan Peterson is a charismatic person. The reason people came to watch him was that he was offering something compelling in a charismatic way.
Sure.
And that really draws people because people are looking for fathers.
Yes.
And
you can't probably the critique back to him is, Jordan, you can't just manufacture what you do he's charismatic in a unique Canadian philosophical way,
but he's still charismatic.
It still is, yeah.
But so who's his counterpart? Brene Brown. I mean,
right.
So
100%.
You have these two psychologists, basically, and sociologists who are presenting mother and father to our culture in a lot of ways, encouraging us to be vulnerable. And you see the crowds full of men. Oh, yeah. Full of women. You see men crying.
Totally.
Right? I mean, there's this, it draws people because we're not mothering or fathering. And I think that's the problem when you go to church. Yeah. It's not that you don't have something meaningful to do. There's no mothering and fathering happen. It's very hard to come in and be mothered and fathered.
Right.
Because
this gets back to the whole Mark Driscoll podcast and his statements of being a father to all these men, right?
Right. Yeah.
Is that good? Is it, is that what you should do? Or is there just a version of it that's good and a version?
Well, I mean, you can go to our 2 Timothy, and it's very clear that there are in the church what we would call elders, not elders like we call some ruling elders. There are elders
who are they're just more experienced.
They're
in life.
Women elders. Well, I think they're recognized people you go over to their house and they're recognized. They have authority based on their age, experience, and life.
Which is culturally more of the norm at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think they're called to invest in the younger people.
Yeah. Our elders of today are sectioned off to die. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that sounds brutal, but it's often very true. And there's not a sense, there are a lot of our elders who do not say, my role is to disciple the younger. The sense is my role is to relax now. Mm-hmm. Not from all, by any means.
Well, I think we go through these phases of, even when you're so you're your age, usually.
However old that might be.
Yeah, however that old, you've got a teenager, right? And many of your counterparts have younger kids. Mm-hmm. And what I hear is, I'm too busy. But your job is not just to invest in the children, but it's to invest in the people who are behind you. Right. To invite them into and encourage them to invest in the people behind them. Like that is Christian discipleship, is to invest in the younger person. Yeah. And the younger person isn't, that 17-year-old. The younger person is somebody 5 years younger than you. Right. That you turn around and offer yourself to and create space for. Yep. Because I think all of us at some level have a mother and fathering kind of thing. And I think that's what...
I agree with you. Yeah.
And I think that's what Jordan Peterson offers. I think the thing I would love to hear your thoughts on this is how much people live in fantasy worlds and how those are becoming reality and how that affects all the areas of our life.
So,
what do we say to that? How do we help in walking that process?
Yeah, when I saw the article, I thought this is tailor-made it's either tailor-made for you because you're the one that's like, no, because I love fantasy worlds, or it's tailor-made for me because I'm like, yeah, these are weird, man. I don't get it.
Right. Which is probably neither of us. But
not exactly. Because I have, just to be honest, I've never played a fantasy role-playing game online or offline in my entire life. Not one time. I don't even know that I have sat in on one ever. So that's me. So it's an interesting thing to talk about. To me, I've been very intrigued. You remember when Paul Vanderklay came to town? I don't know if you remember some of these conversations, but I was just extremely intrigued that these online conversations that he's having, these long form YouTube conversations,
right,
that people are actually in time and space getting together because of them.
Right.
And to me, I went, seriously? And then I was like, well, maybe there's some value to this, right? The same sort of mild epiphany happened to me at another retreat we were on, where some of you all were talking about role-playing games online and the fact that, you were meeting people and kids were getting to know each other. This was us and some other pastors. And so I was just going, okay, I'm going to crack my mind open to the possibility of this. So that's where I am. It's to me, it's a foreign land.
Yes. Do you follow at all Andrew Jones?
There was a baseball player on the Atlanta Braves back in the day named Andrew Jones. I don't know who that is.
Okay, so he's like the leading person in the metaverse.
Sure.
Has been since the late 90s.
Okay, maybe I've heard an interview.
He's a missionary. Actually, travels all over the country.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I will. He used to have a blog called The Tall Kiwi or The Big Tall Kiwi or something.
That
anyway,
sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah, he's connected. Yeah. He's like the link between the New Reformed and the Emergent. Like, so he never went over to the Emergent and he never went over to the New Reformed.
Would you say he was emerging?
No, he would.
For people who cared 10 years ago, these terms mattered a lot.
They probably did, but
yeah, now they don't.
No, I would not say he's emerging. I would say he's one of the godfathers of the whole movement on either side. But anyway, he's lecturing all over Europe on this kind of stuff right now. And it's a big deal, ministry in the metaverse, living in that world, and it's wow. I cannot go there.
Okay,
but anyway, I
you're not getting baptized in the metaverse.
No.
Yeah.
But it's there, and people are going, and they build very deep, intimate relationships with one another. I don't think they're this, and so I've been thinking a lot about, are they the same as a relationship like between you and me? Even when you think about playing, for say, Dungeons and Dragons, if you and I were sitting here and there's 6 of us and we're on an adventure, this relationship and like stuff is happening with our brains, and we have more than just a fantasy together. But when I go online and live in the metaverse, I don't have the same brain kind of reaction.
And this is very much what Stranger Things is about, right? I mean, it's exactly Dungeons and Dragons begins happening in the real world.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's scary to me because relationship matters. Jesus is earthly. I think it's part of this movement that we've gone towards a complete disembodiment of ourself. Like, so it's almost the full platonic. Like, I am not like my body. I am this thing in this other world.
Except get this. So a buddy of mine, he was being courted. He didn't take the job, but he was being courted by an esports company to do physical fitness for their players. Because people who do esports were starting to realize they were becoming famous. And when you become famous, people see you. And when you're an athlete, you're supposed to be in shape.
Right.
And so, yeah, he almost got a job helping do physical fitness for esports stars.
Yeah, wow.
So it all comes back around.
That's interesting.
And if you're like Dustin in Stranger Things, you got to shed a few pounds if you're going to ride your bike and chase after Vecna in the Upside Down.
Right. Yeah, that I don't know anything about that. I didn't watch Stranger Things.
Well, yeah. If you're all about role playing games, you better get into it.
So that's the thing. My daughters and others are.
But no, sorry, I completely derailed. But our bodies. Yeah.
I think it's true though. I think I was saying this on another different podcast, but the idea that we have been, like, our theology has become disembodied. So that's why we don't have a strong message to people who are thinking about abortion. We don't have a strong message to those who are wrestling with their gender, because we as a church have bought into a very platonic, we're going to heaven, like spiritual, like we're trying to become a spiritual being and not realizing that our physicality is part of who we are. And it's part of bearing the image of God. And though it is a tent that we will leave, it is a tent that we will resemble. Like we will be physically resurrected. Like I think with the physical resurrection is sort of this side note. we're like, yeah, Jesus rose from the dead, and we're going to be resurrected physically. Okay, good. That's nice.
People recognized him. He ate food.
Yeah.
That's all very important.
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, he went in and out of rooms, but he also held spoons and started fires. And, you know, I don't know, maybe he never held a spoon. I don't know what their utensils were.
Yeah, it's more like maybe like a flat stick of some form.
Or a knife. I mean, I think everybody just
I think
used
there
a
were
knife.
knives.
Lots of steel things.
Steel, yeah, that's right.
He was a carpenter. He may have had a whole wooden set of you know.
Yeah, I mean, the chosen cast him as like always carrying his carpentry tools everywhere.
Right.
Feeling.
Yeah.
I don't think people had their own tool bags back then.
I don't think so.
Not too many anyway.
No.
Anywho, wow, look at that, disembodied tool bags.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you that we are struggling. So there are a couple things we want in this life. I mean, there's a lot of things we want, but there's a couple things, say, as a society or as a people or even as a church. We want unity and we want diversity. So diversity, I mean like soul and spirit. Or body and spirit, body and soul. We want, but we struggle to unify our diverse parts, and that is, I think you can see that in big societal ways, but you can see that within ourselves. We are a unity of spirit and body, but we tend to think about ourselves as if those are two completely different things. Like I can do this with my body and hopefully my spirit's over here doing something else.
Right.
Yeah. And the truth is they are just absolutely intertwined. The microbiome in your gut affects the way you think, which affects the way you pray.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does.
Yeah. And your spirit or your soul is not the iconography of you. Like your physical form is the icon, the idol of God. It's the movable, living image of God going somewhere. So
somebody said to me that this was really interesting. I was in Greer, it struck me in this similar way. There was a lady working at a coffee shop, was buying coffee right as we were about to leave, and she said, "Oh, you were in the restaurant yesterday." I said, "Yeah," and she said, "Yeah, you were there with a couple ladies." I said, "Yeah, my wife and daughter." And she said, "Yeah, I remember you. You just have a very kind face."
Aw.
Okay.
You have a kind face.
Or something like that. Yeah. And I went, "Oh, thanks," But there's this, I had no interaction with this person.
Right.
And you realize I left a major impression on them yesterday, having no idea, having no interaction, just because they looked over and that's what they got. And the reverse happens all the time, right? The scowl or what? But yeah, there's an encounter between two human beings that's just purely about the physical experience.
Right.
I glanced. I didn't even remember. I didn't notice her. I didn't see her, or I didn't remember it. Right. But she thinks kindness. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, I mean, and that kind of puts forward the idea that your physical body
that's what I'm getting
means something. Yeah.
Right.
And it communicates love. It communicates kindness, gentleness. It's the vehicle with which God presents himself. So no, that's I don't know. It just strikes me like where we're going scares me a little bit about how significant a fantasy world kind of personhood can become to you, because you're more powerful. You can go kill the monsters. You can, your friend, like you don't, like, true life struggles are easier to overcome.
Right. Yeah. And you can just try again.
Yeah.
I mean, not that you can't in life, but you try again with no consequence.
Yeah. There's no consequence to trying. You can do terrible things and then the next character can be super good.
Right. You can just sort of flip-flop and try it on for size.
Right.
I always think, so my daughter plays, versions of these things, but it always strikes me with money, where she goes, oh, all I have to do is earn a little more money and I can make my cousin a house. And I go, you achieved all this in 30 minutes?
Right, yeah.
And yeah, and I think to myself, I'll go, well, okay, at least in the game, houses aren't just like popping out of the character's face, like, oh, house,
Right.
At least that didn't happen. At least there's some resemblance to life in which there's work, but the work you don't get exhausted. There's no boss. It's, in 30 minutes you own it, you make enough to build a house. Is that helpful to learn? Or would it be far better for the kid to go out and rake the yard and get 85 cents and go, ooh, for me to get a pair of shoes, I'm going to have to do this 200 times.
Boy, you only pay your daughter 85 cents to rake the yard. We should probably talk about that.
She's never raked our yard, which is why I don't have a good number. She picks up the dog poo.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, no, I mean, it's not going to change. That's the thing. It's not like so what is the answer as a community? Like,
yeah, we can complain about that all day.
The community of God has to be more enticing and more attractive than the community of World of Warcraft.
Well, and I think that's where Russell Moore ended up landing, right? And so how do you do that? I mean, so I will say, I was in a conversation just the other day where I thought something deeply spiritual is happening right now. This is important. Like, I felt that connection to that, and still think it was. I still feel like I was living life. It was not just a conversation over food. There was more going on. This was deeply important. I personally have that sense about what I do. I think you have that.
Sure.
How do we transmit that meaningfully in such a way that it eclipses role-playing games, or where they become just
role-playing
just
games.
All that they are? Yeah.
Well, I think what we usually think is, okay, well, what is Jordan, like if you take Jordan Peterson, we all have to be like Jordan Peterson. Okay, so he offers this very intense, Jungian, deep interpretation of Scripture that draws a bunch of young men.
Archetypal stuff. Yeah.
So we start thinking, we have to have this heavy-duty stuff from the pulpit, or we have to have this heavy-duty kind of teaching through our community. You could do that. I don't know if that's... I think it boils down to the very beginning of our podcast. Relationship. It's all about relationship and doing something meaningful together. But I think the problem that I see with churches nowadays is that they say, okay, well, the meaningful thing we're going to do is a mission that comes out of this church. Like, we're going to go help our neighborhood, or we're going to go do this X thing. And I think all those things are parts of the church, or we're going to go be evangelists. But the actual coming together and being a people, embodying the church, who is the representation of God and where the Spirit dwells, and where, like, being part of that has to be the thing. Like, the all those other things are just little outcroppings of the beauty of the worship of Jesus.
Sure.
And the place where you can feel the sense of the adventure and know that you are on one in your ordinary life.
Right.
Like, that your ordinary life becomes an adventure.
Right.
The raising of your children becomes an adventure. The building of a space where you can invite people into, both in your church and in your home, is the adventure. Yeah. And do you go on adventures deep into, other countries to offer the gospel, or to go help physically? Yeah, because that's what you're commanded to do, and that's part of the church, to take care of the widow and the orphan and to bring the gospel forward. But it happens as the church, and all of the things, like true reconciliation, doesn't happen when you and I actually go out in the streets and do stuff. It's when people come in and Greek and Jew have to deal with each other.
Sure.
That's when reconciliation happens. And then they model it.
That's the hard stuff in the world that, like if you want to do something significant that's difficult to do, like a reconcile, right? I mean, yeah, you can go shoot a guy. That's simple.
Yeah. Reconcile.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah. Reconciliation is hard. And I think the longer you are with each other, and you hurt each other, and you have different visions and missions, and so you have to learn to actually live life, and that's an adventure to me. But it's a hard one. I think the fantasy life is easy. So how do you make this?
How do you convince people to do the more difficult, less glorious feeling version?
They got to fall in love with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think we sometimes try to get them to fall in love with a lot of other things instead of Jesus. We don't present Jesus. He's either an intellectual kind of thing that we keep trying to paint and draw, or he's an exciting kind of token that we kind of worship so that he'll get us the thing that we want.
Speaking of which, I just read a book that some of our folks might find interesting. It was recommended to me on the trip to Chicago. It was with a guy who works for a publishing house, and he said, I stumbled on our most underrated book that I love. Anyway, it's called My Imaginary Jesus. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, it sounds okay, and the cover looks bad or mediocre. The book is really interesting. And so it's getting at some of this stuff, like all the various, it's a hard endeavor to do what he's trying to write, to like peel back what's not real and what's real. Tough, but he does a good job of navigating through it. So there's the Jesus he deals with the most is he's kind of from another time, but also super comfortable to be around, and he bike rides with him through Portland and understands when he's a little bit, skittish about getting involved in stuff. This Jesus is like, yeah, me too, man. That's kind of weird. And just, that's his favorite version. At some point, the Apostle Peter bursts in, grabs him, and bangs his head against a window and declares him false. And that Jesus goes running through the streets of Portland. It's all... And a chase ensues, and all these other imaginary Jesuses start cropping up. It's interesting.
That is really... that's really fascinating.
Anyway, so if you want to... But that book did get me thinking about the ways that we've tamed Jesus often that don't help us out. They just leave us in our the space we want to be in, really.
That makes sense.
Anyway, there you go. Free book tip of the day.
Free book tip of the day.
That could be our new thing. And now for the free book tip of the day.
We're not a high tech podcast. We can't have sound effects.
That was a sound effect.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I feel like this podcast went somewhere.
It was somewhere, was gone.
Yeah, and then it went.
Somewhere has went.
Well, I think this is sort of the things to think about, and it's things to worry about. I don't know if I worry about, but I'm concerned.
Yeah, plenty of reasons to be concerned.
I think I've hit this point where, I planted the Village in the late 90s. That's when I started doing this ministry, and even then the world was moving fast, right? Because 99 and 2000 was really the big hit from the internet when it's
because I graduated high school shortly thereafter.
Well, when cable internet really began to take off and that kind of thing, and people had higher speed and information was starting to fly, like things still weren't changing as fast. And you really could say, look, this generation, my generation, it needs the gospel, and here's what it's looking at, and here's how it's wrestling with postmodern kind of viewpoints, and things were moving along, and they felt fast to everyone else, but they were relatively slow compared to the last 15 years, 20 years of our culture.
Right.
It's just blown by in the way it changes. My daughter was telling me, now that used to be that you would watch, you watch the different years go through fashion,
Yeah.
And, we're now in the 90s. She said that happens now every couple months. So it's you're in the 80s, then you're in the 90s, then you're in 2000s, then you're back to the 70s. Like it does.
It's true. My daughter bought like 70s jeans for school, but she was feeling the 80s recently. I've been thinking the same thing about music styles.
Oh, goodness. Music.
Like it used to be that everybody was listening to whatever was on KRQ.
Right.
Which had its downfalls. But now it's like you're bouncing all over. Like kids aren't growing up with a shared music catalog anymore.
No.
So everybody has their own curated thing. They're all over the place. I mean, there's something cool about that, but it's also very discombobulating.
Right. We're losing our cultural messages
and our sense of settledness.
Stories,
like we're not settled in one. We're bouncing between, like whatever new Netflix show comes out, we're in that era all of a sudden, or YouTube channel or whatever, right?
Right.
Or TikTok. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So things are moving fast, and I think some of what the church has to do is hang on to its stability, to reference a little post I made, but
stay stable in the 1970s, Eric.
Yes. Don't go. I mean, I think in a world that's constantly flying, you need a place where you're like, you know what, I can go to mission, and I'm going to recognize the people, and I'm going to recognize what's being done, and I'm not there. It's not changing.
Yeah.
Not in a good way.
There is a need for, somebody asked me, during the pandemic, they'd made a whole bunch of changes. They were moving out of state. And they said, what about you? And I thought, and I went, I made some tweaks, but generally I'm doing the same thing.
Yep.
And they were kind of like, oh. I thought, man, we probably need to say more of that. There probably needs to be more of that.
Well, I think when I was growing up in high school, the whole extreme movement was just starting, like doing extreme sports.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I think
Extreme Days soundtrack.
This is kind of built into our culture now.
Okay.
Is this constant need for adrenaline?
Yeah.
Adrenaline hits, and then and so it's hard for us to stay still because there's no adrenaline, there's no serotonin and dopamine, and so it's difficult. But it's actually healthy. Kids who grow up in stable spaces where they're not moving around and mom and dad are not always looking for adventures and crazy actually do a lot better.
Yeah, it's that whole movement. I wonder what's going to happen with the movement that's just seeking adventure, and how many kids are going to look back and be like, and their parents are like, they're going to love this, and how many kids are going to look back and be like, man, I just wish I had a house. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the thing is if you look at you look at the patterns in general, it's not true 100% of the time, but if your family went on a ton of vacations when you're a kid, you probably will go on less because you prefer the stability of staying at home. Your kids will probably want to go on more vacations. I mean, there's this sort of response
pendulum swings.
Yeah, that goes back and forth that way. So
So maybe we're gonna have a bunch of people who hunker down in about 20 years.
I do think there is a deep longing in kids who are in their teens and early 20s to just have everything stop.
It's interesting. Even on our trip, Abby wanted to get back to church so bad. And there was one point on the way back where we were like, is like somebody coming to church that we don't know about? Is there a boy from school who's going to come? She's like, no, I just want to be home.
Right. I did the little, 9 to 12-year-olds, and I was talking to them because a lot of them went on vacation. And what I heard universally was about a third of the way through, they just wanted to go home.
Yeah.
And why? Well, because it's home. It's my bed. It's like I know what's going on there.
And it was cool that Abby felt that way about church.
Yeah.
That to me was a good sign. I thought, okay. So we actually got home. We missed the sermon. And my wife's like, I can't do it. But I thought, I'm going to run over to church with her. And sure enough, she just wanted to see some of those people.
Right.
And then she's like, all right, I'm tired. Let's go.
Nice. All right. Well, I think that's a podcast.
There it is.
I think people got a little bit of a view of Eric and Andy.
Yeah.
And I will try real hard to post a link to the Jordan Peterson thing and also the Christianity Today article, so other people can read it and understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, if they are so inclined. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
let's do it.
You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Cepin and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.